This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Thursday, July 2nd. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on and appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. The menacing coronavirus is showing no signs of relenting in some parts of the world. For the first time since COVID-19 was reported in the United States, the nation on Wednesday topped 50,000 new coronavirus infections for a single day. The record-setting figures were led by the state of California, which posted nearly 10,000 new cases, according to the COVID tracking project operated by The Atlantic magazine. Texas, Florida, and Arizona followed with a combined infections of over 19,000. The World Health Organization says 60% of the world's 10 million coronavirus cases since December came in the month of June, a sign that the pandemic is getting worse and not slowing down. WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus says that more than 160,000 new cases are reported every day. Tedros says countries must, quote, find, isolate, test, and care for every case, trace and quarantine every contact, equip and train workers, and educate and empower communities to protect themselves and others. Now to Africa, where the Nigerian government says it is set to resume domestic flights from July 8th as the country eases its COVID-19 lockdown restrictions, according to Reuters. The announcement comes amid rising infections and deaths. No date was given for the resumption of international flights. Nigeria has tallied more than 25,000 coronavirus cases and nearly 600 deaths, with little signs of the epidemic slowing down. The coronavirus pandemic is changing the worldwide business landscape, and Nigeria is no exception. VOA's Arashar Basadi has the story of a produce delivery business in Lagos that helps women avoid public markets and exposure to the virus. But it's also generating backlash in a country where women battle for equality.
In most Nigerian homes, women buy the food and prepare the meals. By packing and delivering produce, Easy Shop Easy Cook says it saves women time by bringing the market to their doors and helps them stay healthy by observing social distancing. Owner Sadat Salami says her business also enables women to pursue their own jobs and careers. But not everyone thinks this is a good idea.
We encounter hostility every day. When we put out our adverts, the comments under it, you hear that you are too lazy. Why are you allowing someone to buy food for you? You are too lazy. This Calabar woman is going to come and take your husband from you. Why are you allowing that to happen? You know, we get that every day.
Salami has been in business over 14 years. She says comments online often accuse her of eroding traditional gender roles. She says that thinking is outdated and that more women should be in business and in government.
The more women that are in the National Assembly, we will see things from the perspective, and we will have laws in place, and they can force companies and institutions to be able to recognize that this is a woman, these are her challenges, and this is how we're going to include the woman in whatever we're doing.
And she's not alone. Funmi Ogboy founded the Women in Energy Network to put more female faces in the country's oil industry. She says barriers must fall for women to have a chance in business.
We're just not there. We're not there in enough numbers because cultural reasons, as well as just not having that access to financing.
One global consultancy says that at current rates, it would take 142 years for African women to reach parity. Meanwhile, women in Nigeria make up less than 6% of the legislature, and no woman has ever served as a state governor. Arashar Basadi, VOA News, Washington.
The United States is in the midst of a new spike of COVID-19 cases after some states decided to ease lockdown measures. Confirmed coronavirus infections in the U.S. has now surpassed 2.5 million. Lilia Anisimova and Victor Olinik have this report narrated by Anna Rice.
Arizona, Texas, and Florida have become the new U.S. epicenters of COVID-19, with Arizona home to over 20,000 new cases in just a week.
People would look in Arizona, we'd look afar to New York and say, oh, those poor people there, right, on the other side of the country. And now we're outpacing New York, outpacing other places in the world.
Many locals followed lockdown and social distancing recommendations when the measures were first announced in mid-March. Then state and local officials began relaxing restrictions by mid-May after the number of cases began to drop. However, since then, the rate of coronavirus infections has soared.
This is have less to do with any new virus strains or, mutations of the virus. I think it's mostly because the policy of, stay home expired. So people start to go to work and people start to feel a little relaxed.
Experts warn the state's healthcare system is reaching full capacity.
We're already, close to 88%, I believe is the last check, of capacity in our ICUs throughout the state. So that doesn't leave very much room for any space.
Many believed the hot summer months would help flatten the spike of COVID-19 cases, making it easier for communities to reopen. Now, experts say the sunny and hot weather hasn't necessarily weakened the virus and continue to urge the public to wear face masks and practice social distancing. Like Texas, Florida's governor closed bars for a second time because of the surge of COVID cases.
I think it's transmitting quicker right now than it did in March and April, particularly with some of the younger folks. I mean, what we're seeing in Florida is really rapid transmission in that 18 to 34 age group, and you're seeing a lot of cases come up.
Despite the threat, people continue to socialize outdoors, some without social distancing. Miami-Dade County announced all beaches and parks will be closed for the Independence Day weekend from July 3rd to July 7th.
4th of July, coronavirus, I think it's the perfect time to close it. Especially here, everybody likes to crowd up, so prevention, I'd rather them close it than keep it open.
For now, restaurants and malls remain open in Florida with a number of safety and social distancing restrictions back in place. For Lilia Anisimova and Victor Lening from Miami, Florida and Arizona, I'm Anna Rice, VOA News.
After months of COVID-19 restrictions, the European Union began reopening its borders to visitors July 1st, but from the 14 countries it considers safe. The list does not include the United States, where the virus is resurging in some states. Public health is at stake. From Paris, the world's most visited city, Lisa Brandt reports the travel ban also reflects widening transatlantic differences.
The streets and sights of Paris are unusually quiet. Some local tourists are here, but with coronavirus travel bans largely in place, not the foreign ones, including one of the city's mainstays, Americans. They're nowhere in sight at this famous watering hole where 20th century U.S. novelist Ernest Hemingway once frequented, or at this popular English language bookstore founded by an American expatriate a century ago.
It was a big shock, to find out basically in March everything was canceled. All the people who were going to come for the Easter break, everybody who was going to come in the summer, even those who were going to come in September, all canceled.
Tourism represents Paris's biggest industry, employing nearly 10% of the area workforce. Americans count among the top visitors here and across Europe, which welcomes about 15 million foreign travelers each year.
American tourists are great. I think they're the best. Honestly, they love Paris. They're crazy about France. They're very delighted by everything, by the savoir-vivre, by the food, by the river, by the beauty of the architecture.
But for now, they're off a new European Union travel list that includes countries like Canada, Tunisia, and China if Beijing allows in EU travelers. The bloc will review the list regularly, adding in but also striking off countries as health situations change. In June, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the U.S. was working with the EU on how to safely open borders.
And I think we're all taking seriously the need to figure out how to get this open. We need to get our global economy back going again. We'll work to get this right. We want to make sure it's science-based, health-based.
Setting travel restrictions has been no simple matter, sometimes bordering on unfriendly. When Europe became the pandemic's epicenter in March, Washington barred European visitors. The EU soon reciprocated. Now cases are falling in many European countries and rising in parts of America.
In a way, it can be seen as an explanation that Europe was not very impressed by the measures taken in the US. But also there is, as I said, some reciprocity that if the US keeps its ban on Europeans, then we will keep ours as well.
Coronavirus has also seen Europe and the U.S. go separate ways in other areas, prioritizing their own citizens for potential vaccines or promising drugs. Analysts say Europe also feels caught in the middle as U.S.-Chinese tensions have grown during the pandemic. And earlier this year, some European politicians accused the Americans of diverting masks they had ordered for their own citizens, claims U.S. officials rejected.
We didn't feel treated like allies, so now I think the Europeans are more conscious that they need to get on their way on their own.
Whatever direction transatlantic relations take, many here are hoping and expecting that Americans will be back sooner or later. Lisa Bryant for VOA News, Paris.
Spain has had the world's highest nursing home death rates during the coronavirus pandemic. Madrid city government documents show officials set rules preventing nursing homes from transferring some residents to hospitals at the time the infection rate peaked. Now some people are demanding answers. Jonathan Spear narrates this report by Alfonso Bito in Barcelona.
The Spanish health system managed to avoid collapse. However, critics say it was not because the health system worked well, but because few patients were transferred from nursing homes to hospitals. At this nursing home, run by a family business, infections were managed only with the help of local authorities who provided personal protective equipment once it was confirmed the home had cases.
Between 26th of March and 7th of April, it was a dark cloud that we had above, and we had losses.
Some of the 28 people who work here became ill or were quarantined, leaving only 4 staffers on duty. Workers said hospitals appeared hesitant to take suspected COVID patients from nursing homes.
We could not figure out at the crucial moment when we were seeing cases whether it was an order among the hospitals, but we were not getting clear answers once the hospital staff became aware of the person's age. At the end, we had 9 people who died as a result of the virus.
It's an issue addressed at this protest by ambulance technicians calling for safer working conditions.
We are in contact with other regions. We have had evidence there were older people in the nursing homes who were not transported to hospitals.
By late June, nearly 20,000 people in nursing homes had died following confirmed or suspected cases of coronavirus, accounting for 69% of all reported COVID-19 deaths in Spain. Government and hospital officials had yet to respond to the allegations. The first legal actions were filed in late June. For Alfonso Beato in Barcelona, I'm John Spear, VOA News.
We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, a recent U.S. Supreme Court ruling could see many asylum seekers deported. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Linor Moudou, your VOA health correspondent.
Let us be perfectly clear. All countries.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Health Organization says there is no information or evidence suggesting that the coronavirus can be transmitted by mosquitoes.
There are 2 published studies.
It is a respiratory virus which spreads primarily through droplets, generated when an infected person coughs or sneezes, or through droplets of saliva or discharge from the nose.
This happened during pandemics in the past.
For more information on COVID-19, visit who.int or contact your local or national health authorities.
Alongside Nigeria, we're surviving with your real Mr. Soprano. You know what it is, the bad records, get it up. Too many haters thought that I ain't gonna be here. I'm ignoring the quick track in my pain, I replay. Never from
Welcome back to Africa 54. Security was heavy and tight in Ethiopia's Ambo town Thursday for the funeral of singer Haacaaluu, Hundeessaa, whose killing earlier this week triggered 2 days of protests that killed more than 80 people. The farewell ceremony began with well-wishers laying wreaths in Ambo Stadium. A live broadcast showed that the numbers of people in the stadium was sparse, but police were turning people away from the stadium, according to one Ambo resident who tried to attend but met crowds of people who had been told to return home. The Ethiopian singer was shot in Addis Ababa Monday by unknown gunmen. He is being buried at a church in his hometown of Ambo, about 100 kilometers west of the capital. The death of this prominent Oromo singer and revered artist Haacaaluu Hundeessaa has sparked protests in the Addis Ababa capital of Ethiopia. Authorities say they have arrested suspects in connection with his death, but didn't give further information. Letitia Bader, the Human Rights Watch Horn of Africa director, spoke to VOA Salem Solomon and says his killing and the demonstrations that followed need an immediate government response to de-escalate a tense situation.
I'm calling you because of recent developments in Ethiopia after a prominent artist has been reported killed. What do you know so far? What's happening in the country in terms of human rights situation in Ethiopia right now?
Well, there are reports of protests in Addis Ababa and other cities and towns following the killing of very popular Oromo singer Haacaaluu Hundeessaa. And so it's absolutely key that the Ethiopian authorities respond to this by acting urgently to reduce tensions and to ensure that security forces do not make what could be a combustible situation worse. The government needs to order security forces not to use excessive force or to carry out arbitrary arrests, including against protesters, as they've often done in the past.
And also referencing to your report, you had an extensive report back in April looking into the conditions of human rights situation right now and the lack of response from the current government, including internet shutdown. If you can give me a background of what this is happening at the heels of the recent report.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in April, we released a report which was investigating both the abuses but also the violence which had happened during 3 days of unrest in the country in October 2019. And what we had seen was that although the government, both regional government in Oromia and the federal government, had initiated investigations into some of the abuses and the violence in Ambo town and in Dodola town, both in the Oromia region, which we had looked into, this hadn't resulted in any clear forms of redress and any final outcomes of these investigations. At the same time, as you say, we have raised concerns in early 2020 when the government carried out a prolonged internet and phone shutdown in Western Oromia region. And we raised concerns about the impact this was having on families who couldn't communicate amongst themselves, on health services. This was obviously particularly concerning once the pandemic began to affect Ethiopia. But it was also concerning because this meant that communities and people outside of Western Oromia couldn't get information on what was happening, and notably on the government's counterinsurgency operations there. So then putting that into the current context, it's absolutely key for the government to make sure that as soon as possible it is providing accurate, timely information to the public on what they're doing to investigate yesterday's killing, but also how they are responding to what could be a very tense situation. So constant, clear, accurate information is going to be key, and transparency is going to be key here.
Abiy Ahmed has been in power for over a year plus. What is the ultimate solution for these kinds of outbursts and violence and protests now that we are seeing protests happening in the capital city? Is there any sustainable solution for the country moving forward?
I mean, obviously, this killing appears to be generating very profound reactions, but I think this is once again a trigger for the expression of underlying grievances. As we saw last year with the October protests and violence that we saw, this was also an expression of anger with a lack of reforms. A lot of promises had been made in the past, some of which have been followed up on, many of which have not been. So I think it really is key for the authorities to make sure that they are creating a space in which grievances can be expressed peacefully, but also making sure that people feel that their grievances are leading to concrete reforms. So I think, as we've said in the past, this is both a question of reforming key institutions. The security forces are one of the places where the government really needs to focus, and we're talking here not only about the federal security forces, but also the regional security forces, making sure that people feel that they have places where they can go and will be listened if they have complaints against government institutions, against security force behavior and actions, but also making sure that different parts of society are having their voices heard. And again, this is going to be absolutely critical around the postponed elections. Once again, making sure that these are not perceived or actually executive decisions in which other parts of society, opposition parties, but broader parts of society don't have a say, is going to be absolutely critical to ensuring that this situation doesn't happen again.
Elections are slotted again past the pandemic. Any concrete date that you've heard from the government that is promising for the elections to take place?
No, I mean, of course, there have been the recent discussions around, months after the public health crisis is over. I think key here is really going to make sure that there is a transparent communication about what is happening, but as I was just saying, really making sure that all parties and all parts of society feel that their voices and their perspectives are heard in these discussions, and that there will be a space for different groups to also basically have their voices heard in the campaign period, etc. So there are a lot of concerns, and I think the problem is there aren't always many avenues and channels through which these concerns are able to be voiced or heard, and often a lack of evidence that the government is listening when these concerns are being voiced.
In a 7-2 decision on June 25th, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that non-citizens whose asylum appeals are denied by immigration officials have no constitutional right to appeal the decision in a federal court. This allows the administration of President Donald Trump to move ahead with deportations of a number of asylum seekers.
The case is based on the matter of an asylum seeker from Sri Lanka named Vijaya Kumar Turasigam. He told immigration officials he had been abducted, interrogated, and beaten so badly he spent days in a hospital. He escaped Sri Lanka and eventually crossed into the U.S. from Mexico, where he asked for asylum. Immigration officials denied his request and then denied his request to appeal to a higher court. Lawyers for the Sri Lankan man appealed on his behalf, and the case made its way to the Supreme Court.
But he said, even if you're right that Congress has said in the statute that there is no, that I cannot bring this challenge through habeas, the Constitution requires that I be able to bring my claims to a federal court. And the Ninth Circuit said yes, and the Supreme Court today said no.
In denying the case, the justices pointed to a law that says that if a person is seeking asylum, he or she has a right to an interview with an immigration officer or a judge who can make a quick and final decision on their case. Turasagam says his interview lasted 13 minutes. Then the immigration judge refused his request and he was scheduled to be deported. The American Civil Liberties Union stepped in, claiming the expedited deportation limits the asylum seeker's right for a fair court hearing, guaranteed by the Constitution.
They get a very brief look by an administrative judge. Sometimes that hearing lasts 10 minutes, and that's without a court looking at the process. I think what we're looking at as the continuation of asylum seekers being sent back wrongly to persecution and possibly death.
Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito emphasized undocumented immigrants detained close to the border do not have the right to court proceedings. He added the law passed by Congress granted them preliminary consideration, and that was enough.
There's a real sense of that he thinks that asylum seekers are abusing the credible fear process. There's a real, that, for example, he suggests that because a relatively small percentage of people who were found to have credible fear were granted asylum in 2019. And that's somehow evidence that there are lots of fraudulent and frivolous credible fear.
Two of the Supreme Court justices voiced their disagreement. According to them, constitutional rights should not depend on the changing political climate in the U.S. Experts say this decision will create a precedent for thousands of asylum seekers coming to the U.S.
The result of this decision is that there really is no judicial oversight for this fast-track process. So it is in large part left in the hands of the immigration officers. And it's a system that is prone to abuses and mistakes because it is fast.
Deputy Solicitor General Edwin Needler, representing the Trump administration, claimed that if the Supreme Court had ruled differently, it would have created a huge judicial backlog and thousands of new cases. It also would have granted undocumented immigrants the right to appeal immigration decisions in federal court. For Anusha Vitisyan in Washington, NRI's VOA News.
That's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.